I can't tell if I really want to do this video or not, but why is the left so divided?
You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
The majority of Americans want to stop weapons transfers to Israel. That same fucking poll shows that. They are lying about it. Bro, I swear to God, like, people just don't understand. Like, the Democratic Party doesn't understand that, like, a big part of the reason why people were excited was because she wasn't Biden, which meant that she was going to be more dynamic and potentially even change some of these policies that Biden was running on.
You should honor the lives of those who call for a ceasefire in Palestine. Ceasefire!
Okay, so hey, how's it going? I'm Cam Hayden, and today we're going to talk about the political left in the United States and why everything seems so not together at all. I've been back and forth of whether or not I wanted to talk about this for a while, but I honestly think the more this election goes on, the more I do really feel like I need to talk about this. So I have a few bulletin points. We're just going to start from the top. First, I'm going to tell you how I got to wanting to even talk about this. So a little while ago, I tweeted this. We need a way to make a distinction between what is considered a leftist and what is just a Democrat. Like, the confusion between the two is out of hand. This stemmed from me seeing a newscaster call Kamala a leftist. If you are a leftist, you probably twinged like I did, because what are we talking about at this point? I want to start the bare bones of this and just do a strict definition. So first, we have to ask the simple question of how do we define leftist? And I think this creator, Leeja Miller, one or the other, I'm not really sure how to pronounce her name. I think she did a really good job of defining what a leftist is. The definition she used is the progressive left, and I think it'll work just fine for what we're doing here. So as far as progressive beliefs, 1, government services should greatly expand from current levels. 2, white people benefit from societal advantages. 3, support substantial hikes in tax rates. 4, positive views of democratic socialists. As far as I'm concerned, that's a pretty good baseline to run off of to define the progressive left or a leftist. And that's what we are going to use going forward. So now, I mentioned watching a newscaster refer to Kamala as a leftist, and it irked me a little bit, and there's a good reason. Leftists are not liberals, and liberals are definitely not leftists, especially in the US.
But you never see them going under the label of liberals. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox. And a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling and take him for a friend.
You see, I have this problem with the misassociation of what the difference is between a Democrat and a leftist. We need to find a way to make a distinction aggressively between Democrat and leftist. The reasoning is simple. I don't want, as a leftist, to be associated with anybody that is comfortably okay with, I don't want to be associated with anybody that goes by, that's morally okay with the bye-buying of babies. And we can see that through the random uptick of Kamala supporters who are like, yeah, I mean, my life is fine. If those kids gotta go, those kids gotta go. If I find the TikTok video, I will insert it here. The numerous TikTok videos that are like, the comfort of my life is enough, to the point where, like, yeah, if other countries are being harmed by my problems, that's okay. As long as I'm not being harmed by my problems, it's not my issue. I don't want to be associated with those people. And so, for my personal stake and for the sake of political understanding, we need to draw a fine line in definition of what the difference is between a leftist and a Democrat. Throughout history, it can be understood that Democrats, liberals, make a strong tendency to still defend capital, but they defend capital in kind of a nice way. There's so many memes about, like, the rainbow flag next to, we're sending bombs. but in rainbow flag. Like, yeah, we're still gonna blow things up, but we like have we tolerate gay people. One is a party of the people, I guess is the better definition here. For leftists, on a general basis, the amplification, the views, the morality is all based on people, keeping people happy, healthy, and safe by not afflicting harm onto others or by reducing that harm to the bare minimum. Liberals, Democrats work on the side of the left, yes, but they work on the side of the left still to maintain the state of capital. They still work to push forward the guise of capitalism.
Reform, a man observing a foundation, observing a system, sees many problems. But he assumes that there's nothing wrong with the system. The foundation of the system for him is a good system. Thus, what he seeks to do is to change the building as best he can, but he wants to leave the foundation intact. Example, if I came to this building, it's Ackerman Hall, is it not? If I came to Ackerman Hall and I looked at the foundation was falling. It was just falling, couldn't possibly stand. If I were a reformist, I'd say, okay, put a piece of board over that. So we cover the foundation. We haven't touched it, and then I'll come here and say, put a window there, put a door here, put a frame here, put 2 rooms where there used to be 1. What I'm doing is reforming the system. I am trying to make it look different, but I'm keeping the same rotten foundation. You must understand that because this country is full of reformists, black people notwithstanding. And these reformists have a tendency to deceive you, to let you believe that things are really being changed, when in fact the foundation has not been touched, and the longer it stays, the more rotten it becomes. The more rotten it becomes.
Which is fine. That's what they're there for. That is what they do. And they do it in a more humane and a little more morally ambiguous way. The general leftist is a lot less morally ambiguous and a lot more on the very, very far, some would even say extreme side of morality, wherein most leftists on average can probably just agree that war is just kind of pointless and we don't need it as a society. Most leftists will also agree that universal basic income is a pretty good and solid and normal thing to ask of society. Housing should be a basic human right. Should be free. Things that you need to live shouldn't cost you so much that it puts you into deep amounts of debt. Going to the hospital should be free. Education should be free. These are really, really radical things by the outward definition, very radical. But to a leftist, they're not. They all seem pretty rational. I live in this world. I didn't ask to be brought into this world. The least you can do is make this world a more interesting, fun, and enjoyable place while I am here. And as we work together to find out why we as humanity are here, why not cultivate a space that is enjoyable for all of us? The liberal/Democrat sees the problems of the world and says, these are okay. I know that they're bad and they're subject to never change. And as long as I make it good enough for a certain amount of people, then I've done a good job. And I think that is the best way that we can define the issues between what is a leftist and what is a liberal/Democrat. You will find more leftists on the side of humanity and its struggle with life and its pursuit of happiness, and you will find more Democrats and liberals in arms with them to a certain degree. And then at a certain degree, there's a limit. There's a limit to which liberals will allow things to go. Once everyone must be put on the same playing field, it starts to, and I don't have a real explanation for this, but it starts to bother liberals. I don't know what it is. Probably the whole like protection of capital thing. So I know you're probably saying, we get it. Leftists and liberals are not the same. Move on. Tell us more. Tell us about the other side. And yeah, let me tell you about conservatives and why they have unity. So on an ideological scale, being a conservative makes the most logical sense in our current world. I'm not saying that it's the most socially acceptable thing because, as we know, when people gain in knowledge, they become more liberal. The less knowledge that people have, the less liberal ideology that they hold inside of themselves. To be a leftist requires you to look ahead at the future and say that there can be a brighter day. There can be change, there can be things that we have never seen before, and it can all take place, whether you believe it or not. It can take place. There is a possibility for a better world than the one that we currently reside in. Being a conservative requires you to do two things: find a way to exist in the world and its current parameters and metrics and values. And two, think of how to best tune your life so that you win on the playing field that you're on. With that being understood, you have to look at it from the perspective of this. To be a conservative, you don't really have to have that future sight. You don't have to have that hopefulness. You just have to go, okay, yeah, there is racism. But luckily enough for me, I got rolled the perfect dice and I can do more about it. Or yeah, there is racism, and I can be a token. And inside of being a token, that means that I can use the minimal boost it gives me to place myself into positions where I don't have to experience the negatives that others have.
Black Republicans specifically are some of the most disliked and unpopular political figures within the black community for a reason. I'm pissed. Of the 4 black Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives, none, 0 represent majority black districts. I am royally pissed. In fact, they all represent majority white districts, something they seem to be very proud of.
South Carolina is majority white, correct? Yeah, it's still. My district is majority white district. Your Utah is majority white district, correct? Michigan, really. Florida, is your district majority white district? Well, how do we get here? Like, a lot of white people had to vote for it.
A lot of the things that conservatives will have to push through Congress or the House are pretty like logical things. They're very straightforward. I'm giving a lot of benefit of the doubt here because when I say conservative, I mean just to the right of the line, that is the political spectrum. I don't mean fascist. That is a whole totally different thing. When I say conservative, I mean somebody that has a very traditional set of values. All of the values are set on everything that the US, this land that we live in, operates on: patriarchy, sexism, misogyny, racism, xenophobia, whatever it may be. It is a person that is operating on the baseline understanding of humanity. You are operating solely from the source that you are a person who was born into a society and you must make the best out of the things that you have been presented with, not to try and change the things that you have been presented with, unless it is to strengthen the things that you have been presented with. There's a lot of holes in the ideology of a conservative. There's a lot of flaws in the thought process. But when I was younger, I did find myself saying that, yeah, logically, if we're talking about like the financial agency of this country, it does make sense that conservatives want to be in charge of that. As time went on, then I was like, yeah, duh, it makes sense to me because we live under capitalism. And living under capitalism means that one of these parties is doing full capitalism, with a little bit of fascism. And now it's a lot of bit of fascism. It's changed drastically. And the other party is doing light fascism with light capitalism, where they tease other forms of social and economic bearings. So yeah, that's why conservatives have so much unity. It's a baseline understanding of being a human and understanding that you were born into a certain society and you must follow in line as a conservative with a normal set of values, understanding the world as it has been given to you, not trying to step outside of those lines and remain inside of the lines that you have been drawn. I will say that one of the more interesting things that has happened because of this election cycle and what wanted made me want to bring up this topic as a whole is simply just the fact that Democrats have been co-opting leftist imagery. Even something as simple as me going to the bookstore with a friend yesterday, looking around the bookstore and noticing something very interesting. In alignment with all these other books that were next to it, there was a very striking and familiar imagery that I saw that had nothing to do with the thing that it was related to. This book, Justice is Coming, how progressives are going to take over the country and America is going to love it. This book was placed next to a series of things that were very interesting to me. One was a Kamala Harris book, this book right here, The Truth We Hold. And just above it was a book by Fred Trump. I don't remember if he's his cousin or brother. I don't remember what's going on there. He's a part of the Trump family. All in the Family, the Trumps, and how we got this way. And I don't know why. I thought it was very weird. And then I stumbled upon a fun video by an amazing creator. They did some things over James Baldwin. Believe they're a writer. You should check their channel out. But this creator talks about the numerous amounts of iconography taken from the left in order to promote the ideology of liberals slash Democrats. And I thought it was very, very interesting. I think that this is part of the reason that there's so much confusion about what a leftist is and what a Democrat is. And there's so many people that are just like, yeah, I'm a leftist, and they're really just a Democrat. And that is totally okay. But understanding which side of that line you stand on is very important before you align yourself with people and then you go to some setting and you're like, whoa, I'm not that actually. I'm not that at all. And so I think that using this imagery, changing the way, because they know that this is something that pulls on our heartstrings. There's a rise in different types of ideologies across the US. There's a more positive outlook on socialism in the US. There is a more positive outlook on communism in the US. And as a result, I think that it made it a lot easier for the Democratic Party to go, what if we use this imagery? What if we used it and we know that it already provokes an emotion inside of people's hearts? We know that people will attach themselves to these themes, these ideas, these pieces of signified unity. And it's a perversion of the thing. Is it smart? Absolutely. It's genius marketing. You're really good at what you're doing, but it is definitely part of the issue. It is something that is causing a major issue among the left, I believe, because now you have a lot of people who are coming forth, and some are just people who were just bandwagoning into leftist ideology because it was the popular thing at the time. But then you also have people who were just looking for a space to find themselves. The world that we have set up and that we live in is so black and white that a lot of times you will find people in subsections and groups that they don't actually belong in. And it's not to say that they don't deserve to be in those spaces, it's to say that they don't like mesh with that ideology. And I think that's really, really interesting, such as like the insane amount of conservative Black people. There's a great documentary that covers all of the Black people who are specifically voting for Trump.
Heard a lot of people talking about Black Republicans, but I spent all of the RNC talking to Black Republicans.
So it is with being a Black conservative. I equate it to being gay back in the 50s or 60s.
And they are now conservative, or they have been conservative for years, and they've decided that the Democratic Party doesn't have their best interests at heart, and they it's kind of a point of contention because it's like, oh, whoa, yeah, I definitely was born Black, and so people would just automatically assume I'm a Democrat, but no, I've decided to become a conservative. And they tell their story about how like they they aren't democratic and they don't really align with the things that they're seeing. And then you have the people who are doing the weird thing where it's like, yeah, I definitely decided to change from being a Democrat once I realized that the Democratic Party used to be the conservative party. And I'm like, shut up. That doesn't make, we're not doing that. That's not how that context works at all. You need to go look at the actual history of that and the ramifications of why that happened and what took place and all of those things, because there's always this dramatic amount of people who talk about the flip. and stop talking about the flip. But then you also have on the other side of the coin conservative trans people and conservative gay people, who have been raised up in one ideology or never raised in the other ideology at all, and find themselves in conflict with these ideologies. And I think all of this confusing use of new imagery and taking old imagery and iconography and putting it up and using it as something else is basically just confusing a lot of people. I'm not saying that I don't really care, but I'm not saying that the conservative Black people are confused by the iconography or the information. I will say they're probably a little confused by the information, the ones that specifically only talk about the flip as being the reason why they are conservative. But this isn't to say that all of these people are confused. This is to say that I think that the use of iconography and its manipulation has done a great bit of damage on the United States population as a whole. And all of these people that follow any independent ideology just kind of follow it, especially because of the fact that, like, most people aren't so into politics that they're digging their brain into it and burying their head into it and finding out all of the information that they need to. Some are like me. I'm just bored. I like looking at stuff and looking into things. But every person on the general population scale is not very interested in politics. They have an alignment and they have like 5 things that they stand for. And then that's how they choose their political ideology. And it's even one of the things that like the founding fathers talk about, where they're kind of just like, people aren't supposed to be this invested in politics, which is another topic for another day, because the founding fathers were a bunch of rich people who decided that they wanted to start a country and evade taxes. So, like, yeah, they definitely didn't want you involved in politics, because they were like, yeah, you should have a gun and you should be able to have low taxes because you will be a rich man with slaves one day. And then they didn't know slavery would end. Like, there's a lot of things involved in that. So, with all of this, what is the point of the video? Well, I really wanted this video to be about the election, but then I decided that I really just want this video to be about leftism and defining it, putting up markers to understand what's going on in the world between the left and the Democrats, between the left, liberals, and conservatives, and making a more cohesive understanding of all of that. But then I also want to end this on an interesting theory. What happens to the left? So I tweet a lot. Once again, I tweeted something that was very interesting to me. After watching the DNC, I tweeted about this. Watching the DNC is my casual reminder that we are getting closer to when the Republican and Democratic parties will start to join together to form a new Republican Party. And the more left Democrats will group with leftist entities to form their own new Democratic Party. You're probably like, what are you talking about? That's a lot of words and it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Or you're like, it does make a lot of sense. Yeah, that fits, that vibes, that makes sense. That's what it should be. Well, the thing is that this isn't the first time that this would have occurred, which is why in the bottom half of that tweet it says, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. That's just a fun quote, but also a very true quote. There has been a time frame in which the Democratic Party dissolved itself. Because as I said, as like humanity learns more, we become more and more left leaning. Our intelligence increases the amount of like understanding, both socially, economically, and emotionally. As time goes on, we become more and more left leaning. The furthest right is feudalism. Well, there's probably much further right, but we're going to talk about feudalism for right now because I can't think of anything that's further right at the top of my head. And maybe I'll make a little notation that says this is further right, dumbass. We went from feudalism to what we have now. And people always make this statement of, well, there was a time when we had kings and no one could see the end of us having kings. So why would anybody be able to see the end of capitalism? Or there was a time when we had segregated classrooms, and there was a time when we had slavery. There was a time where we were a colony. There, no one could see past the ideas of this or that or this or that. As time goes on, we look at the past and we are like, that is so morally corrupt. We would never do that again. And then we go like 10 years forward, and then we're like, that is so morally corrupt. We would never do that again. And that's just what happens. There was a time frame, and I cannot remember it for the life of me, but the Democratic Party, and this has happened throughout America's history, where one party will dissolve into two parties will dissolve into each other, and a new party will be formed outside of those parties, because there's always people on either side. And also a two-party system only lends itself to really having two ideologies, but humans are so complex and multifaceted that I think that the concept alone of having a two-party system, we don't really have a two-party system, but we really do have a two-party system thanks to the Electoral College. We're not talking about the Electoral College. We're talking about this right now. I have to stay on track. This is usually why I have a script. Essentially, over the course of the US's history, parties will become more in line with each other's ideology. Half of that party may be like, I don't agree with you at all. And the other half of that party may be like, I totally agree with you. And that other half of the party, usually the left leaning half of the party, divides and starts its own party and becomes the new formation of the blank and blank or whatever. Currently, I think the thing that we have coming next is Democratic Socialist or the New Democrats. But I think it'll just be the Democratic Socialist Party of America that will blend the growing desire from the American people of the Green Party, of the third party candidacy, and the democratic socialists that stand already within our government. The divide will happen because, to put it blankly, Joe Biden is like a conservative. And I don't mean that in like the sense that like he's Trump. I mean that in like the sense of like, if you looked back 20 years and you looked at a conservative running, it would probably be Joe Biden, not just as a joke or a bit. Like yes, he was a conservative at one point in his tenure, but also as like just on the basis of his political standing and what his ideologies are. For the most part, he is kind of just a conservative. Yes, he's really good on unions, and yes, his focus is on the job market, but also these are conservative values. In especially in our current political climate, understanding what a conservative would be is a really helpful thing. And I think that in our current political climate, Joe Biden would be a conservative, not whatever's happening on the right, because the other aspect of this is that the right is also very, very divided. Conservatives and Trump or dump voters are like so split apart. There are two camps. There are people who vote for Trump and there are conservatives. And then there are like moderates that tend to vote conservatively. But for the most part, there are two categories on that side. And because of that, I think that depending on the outcome of this current election, once depending on the outcome of the election, Trump loses, and that will be kind of like the dwelling factor of that Trump side of the conservative party. There will be less incentive, there will be less vitriol behind him, there will be less reason to like go out and vote. He'll be older by the time that the next election cycle comes around, and his age is already showing on stage. I think that pairing him next to Joe Biden made him seem a lot more cognitive. But now that we're seeing him next to Kamala, it's pretty obvious that he is also just as old as Joe Biden. And I think that after this last election, the support will kind of just die off. Not to the same degree. Like, yeah, he'll probably run again, but I just don't think that he will be as big of a threat. Mostly because if the Democrats do win, then a lot of their policy changes and things that they have been working on in the background for the economy, and everything that we wanted changed will start to take place. And so we will finally go for a two-term with a democratically elected president. And with that, that awkward misunderstanding people have of what happens when you vote for Trump will kind of dwindle down, because there's a lot of misinformation about like what came from Trump's presidency and what didn't. And there's a lot of really good videos. I will link one down specifically because there was one where he just strictly talks about politically standing, breaks down the things, and it's pretty short, it's quick, you can watch it. And it's really, really good. Tells you everything you need to know. But as far as like the national understanding of what Trump did while in presidency, it's pretty skewed. It's not that everybody doesn't know, but the information isn't all there, and that's part of the problem. But yeah, I think that depending on the outcome of the election, the Conservative Party and the Democratic Party, especially with the way that they're running Kamala's campaign, will sort of branch off slowly but surely. It might take a few years, maybe in the next 10 years, whatever. But slowly but surely, we'll start to regroup and redefine as the new conservatives or whatever they will label themselves as. And the new Democrats or the Democratic Socialists will form their own new party. And that is how we're going to transition into the next phase of life. Hopefully, this video was useful. If it was, like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what your thoughts are, though. Like, is there more to why the left is divided? Have I missed anything? I probably have. Usually I write. This time I didn't write a script because I had just a lot of thoughts in my head, and I was like, I could just talk it out. If you're a returning subscriber, tell me if you like this new format where I don't really write too much down and I just kind of talk about the things that I already know. And if you don't like it and you're a new subscriber, tell me that, dude. All right. Bye.
A revolutionary comes into the building, observes Ackerman Hall, and says, looks at the foundation and said, hey, this foundation is filthy, it's rotten, it's corrupt, it must be torn up. A new one must be put in its place. Once he makes that decision, and once that theoretical decision which he's made is demonstrated actively in his day-to-day life, you have a revolutionary. Thus, a revolutionary is not someone who seeks to reform a system, he's someone who seeks to replace it. I'm a revolutionary.